It's time. It's episode 80, the ATM podcast. International broadcaster and commentator of much acclaim, Mark Watson. Joining me as always, Martin Devlin from the platform. We're talking about Super Rugby, why New Zealand Rugby will never sack a coach. A Canes Blues final looks in order. How epic will that be? The Warriors lost again, a must-win match against the Titans coming up. How many medals are we going to win in Paris inside the stadium after the Olympic athletes were announced last week? No coverage of the Black Caps series if we want to get to it. And Gregor Paul wrote a really interesting piece on the weekend. And normally these pieces are quite weighty and wordy, but this was just outlining the largesse and the excess spending going on at New Zealand Rugby, which is effectively a government department under the last Labour government's reign, where they just keep hiring executives and more committees and do more reports and more outsourcing and more reviews. Anyway, let's start off with the Crusaders.
Apologise to me!
Because that seems to be the topic on everyone's lips after yet another loss on the weekend, Mark. What do you do if you're the Crusaders CEO, apart from keep Rob Penney, because we know this is what they're going to do?
Look, I think that we've just got to a level now where I think it's intolerant to continue with sort of this level of mediocrity. I mean, sport's a cutthroat world, isn't it? I mean, victory and defeat, in my opinion, are the only currencies that matter. You know, we've seen dismal performances from the Crusaders and the Highlanders, and I think it is time we address the elephant in the room, and that is those catastrophic coaching appointments of Clark Dermody and Rob Penney. Maybe being a bit tough on Clark Dermody. Maybe he doesn't quite have the cattle that perhaps Rod Penney and the Crusaders have. But let's be blunt. I mean, you can't sort of bench an entire or sack an entire 23 players. So where does blame fall? Well, you've only got to look no further than the sidelines. I mean, you look at the players that were great players last year, but under Penny have become very lackluster. I'm Cullen Grace, Tom Christie, Dominic Gardner. I mean, very much stars of yesteryear, reduced to sort of more shadow of himself under this current reign. Now, if Super Rugby and rugby claim to be the epitome of professionalism, then it's time we show some backbone, Martin, and hold these coaches accountable. I mean, could you imagine that Dermody and Penny prowling the sideline of NFL, English Premier League, or even the NRL? They would have been shown the door long ago. Yet here they stand, staining the integrity of, the Crusaders brand, arguably at a greater level, just our beloved sport. You know, we sort of pride ourselves, don't we, on the highest standards, especially when it comes to, say, the All Blacks. And yet, you know, no offence, but Ian Foster should have been sacked after the Irish series. But no, we didn't have the balls or tenacity to make that call, and we ultimately ended up losing 14 tests under his reign, and we didn't win a Rugby World Cup. You know, I remember the debates we once had over Main's Hart, Henry Mitchell, and most recently Ian Foster. Look, I mean, I think part of the problem too with the Crusaders is their insular approach to coaching appointments. You know, this whole Crusaders brotherhood mentality, and I think it once did sort of bear fruit, but I think it's an outdated model, and I think it's strangling the life out of that particular team. I mean, ask the question: did Rob Penney get this role based on merit, or merely because he wore the right colours? What if Clark Laidlaw had have put up his hand? Would he have stood a chance if he had dared throw his hat into the ring for that job? I mean, look what he's doing with the Hurricanes. And so, yeah, I think we've got to be a lot tougher. I think we've got to be a lot more ruthless, mate. You know, I just think both teams would go better at the moment under better coaches.
All right, how's this for a thought? And this was from a very highly placed international coach I was speaking to recently. He said to me, just think about this. He said, okay, so you've got Jason Holland and Leon McDonald, who had been plucked out of the Hurricanes and the Blues, respectively, to join Razor as, you know, his assistant coaches. Well, were those guys that good at their jobs? Because the new guys that have come in, Vern Cotter and Clark Laidlaw, virgin coaches at that level in Super Rugby, have suddenly elevated both of those teams to a level that neither of those guys had previously been able to do. So how are we meant to assess that, Mark? All of a sudden, were Jason Holland and Leon McDonald average kind of coaches, or are Vern Cotter and Clark Laidlaw super coaches, or is it somewhere in the middle?
Oh, no, I think we've got super coaches. I think Vern Cotter is a class act. I think you've got to see what he did with Scotland and the platform that he set for Gregor Townsend and those guys. And I look at, you know, I look at what we've seen with Laidlaw here, and I think he's exceptional. You know, clearly a very, very smart guy, Scottish, clearly from Scotland, did great things with the New Zealand Sevens team. And I genuinely wonder whether we would actually have the balls and the gumption in the future if he continues doing what he's doing, Laidlaw builds a bit of a dynasty down there at the Hurricanes, whether or not we'd ever consider him to potentially be an All Black head coach, knowing the fact that he's not actually a true blue, so born and bred New Zealander. And look, I do. I mean, we can make all the excuses for Penny about how all the backroom staff were sort of robbed from the Crusaders because of their success and are now all been elevated into the All Black sort of environment. But I mean, what did Clark Laidlaw have when he came into the Hurricanes situation in terms of his backroom staff? What exactly does Vern Cotter have in his backroom staff? So I think we can pick our choosing arguments to try and defend Penny and try and defend the Crusaders. But look, I think good coaches are good coaches. We see it in the English Premier League all the time. And yeah, stop making excuses and let's just see who else is out there. I mean, look, Crusaders, man, I mean, their brand is at a micro level is not dissimilar to the All Black level. It's about performance, it's about precision, it's about no compromise. And the longer this goes on, it's amazing how quickly you can undo, a decade or 2 decades of hard work in terms of undoing a brand overnight.
Apologise to me!
Do the Warriors need to panic, or is this just a little blip? They're just in a bad run of form at the moment.
Interesting statistic. What do the Crusaders and the Warriors have in common? They have only won 4 out of their last 11 games. They have a 36% winning record. People don't realise that with this Warriors team. I've heard you say it, and I agree with you. They're the darlings of the media. They've almost become a sacred cow. The reality is, though, they are not winning, and they're not winning when they need to be winning. I watched that game Friday night, 25 minutes into it. I thought, man, we are going to just put this Dragon side to the sword. We had so much dominance. We just couldn't seem to turn that into sort of the points required. The moment they came down our end, put us under any sort of pressure, we just folded and capitulated. And I just wonder whether they are just reading a bit too much of their hype. They come out and say, oh, look, we're not getting caught up in it. We block all of that out. But these are young men. They're on social media. Are they really blocking that all out?
No, I don't think they are. I think I'd say there's a few that aren't all over social media, but I would say that most would probably be reading most of the social media. Yeah, and all of the social media they're getting is also fulsome in its praise, and it's all. I just call it the Women's Weekly crowd, mate. That's what it is. There is no analysis. There is no actual critique. It's all just rah-rah stuff. And look, they played like they were believing their own press. Whether or not we're just putting that, on them and saying because that's the way that it looks, I'm not sure that that's actually true. But they certainly need a win against the Titans. And if they can't bowl this Titans side, I think, man, that side is not going nowhere if they can't beat the Titans.
Yeah, look, and they just need to make a statement against the Titans. It's not just about beating them. I've got to blow them off the park. I think there are still questions, and I know a few media have written up on this, but I still think there is genuinely a question mark over where do you play Roger Tuivasa-Sheck. I'm not sure that he's a centre. Do you move him out onto the wing? Do you drop Montoya? Do you put Kolstad on the wing and put Roger back at fullback? There's just something not quite right there at the moment. I don't think there's any division in the team because Roger's suddenly come in, as a couple of media people have possibly sort of pointed to, that somehow, the culture's not quite right at the moment. I think any frustration we saw from Sean Johnson over that era from Roger Tuivasa-Sheck was just the heat of the moment, being a competitor.
Yeah.
But the other question for me is, look, actually, to be fair to Sean Johnson, he's still actually playing well. What's interesting statistic, he was involved in 29 tackles on Friday night. Why is he having to make 29 tackles? Why is he having to be so involved defensively? That is not really his role. I mean, generally, you tend to move those guys out a little wider and take them out of it. You don't want them getting injured. They're your marquee players, or generally they're not great defenders. Why is he having to pick up that sort of workload? So, look, I think this is the first time this club in the last sort of 18 months has probably been put under some real pressure. It'll be interesting to see if there is a shift, if there is a turn from the media, if in fact they do lose this game to the Titans, Martin.
Apologise to me!